You having fun? Excellent, excellent. You know, I've been out, if you haven't seen it, I've been watching this screen outside. UCLA has this interview that they've been doing with students and people all around town. It's called, you know, what is your American dream? And there's a guy in an orange shirt, student, and he says, the American dream as it has traditionally been is dead. And in the next screen he says, but it's been invented in millions and millions of new wonderful ways. So he's both cynical and rah-rah optimistic. So let me ask you first, Pedro, is the American dream, we're here to talk, by the way, about education, mobility, immigration. So I want to know what you think about the American dream, whether this is a conversation that is past its prime.
No, I think it's an important conversation. I think going back to the last one about American exceptionalism,
right.
I think the idea that you could remake yourself in this country, that you have opportunity and with talent, experience, mobility is an important idea. It's one that lives first and foremost amongst our immigrants. They believe it more than anyone else.
But is it true?
For some. If you look on this campus, I'm not sure what the percentage is. I would say over half our kids, our students now, are either first or second generation immigrants. Many of them are first generation college students. They're living it. However, I do a lot of work around the country with schools, and there are right now the strongest predictor for how well our kids will do in school and whether or not they'll go to college is family income.
Right.
Which means lots of young people with talent and ability do not have access to a college degree, much less the jobs that allow them to break into the middle class.
So Linda, I'm going to leave Jaime to last because you're my evangelist on this, but I want to, Linda, ask you in terms of what needles need to be pushed, because part of this discussion is, when I just listened to you, is that if there's a will, there's a way, if there are resources. But if you read the latest cover story of The Atlantic by Matthew Stewart, the point of it is the top 10%, the top 9.9%, not the 0.1%, but they've got it really good. And you know, they haven't seen their situation erode. It's everybody beneath that has. And that there's an illusion that folks can move up, that they are blocked, that there are very few pathways to get through, even if they did have the will. So I just want to challenge that and ask you, you're in public, you know, Linda, you went to USC, I know. No reaction here. You went to USC, but in terms of what you, in terms of what you see your job as, what levers are you trying to move to make this situation better?
Yeah, so Mayor Garcetti reestablished his Office of Immigrant Affairs, which I lead. I've been there for almost 5 years, so part of our goal is really to figure out ways to integrate immigrants into the local fabric, whether it's through economic mobility, whether it's through social or cultural ways, and really to empower immigrants to also be a part of the city. And as we all know, the city of Los Angeles was founded by the pobladores, and so it has a history, LA has a history of being a place that receives and welcomes immigrants. And I think the mayor, in particular, Mayor Garcetti, has been really proactive in creating policies and initiatives through this Office of Immigrant Affairs as well, where we do focus on issues of health and health outcomes and health access. We focus on how do we, assist our dreamer population.
Right.
I know Pedro just talked about that, but for us, it's really important also to create community engagement and empowerment within the different neighborhoods that are part of the city. So we've created a lot of different programs and initiatives to help support the integration of immigrants here in the city.
But if you weren't there, would that be happening now? There's a public intellectual in Los Angeles named Gregory Rodriguez with Zocalo, and Greg has written, look, the rates of assimilation of the Hispanic community are staggeringly fast, stragglingly successful. Home buyership, language acquisition, intermarriage, across Hispanic lines, whatever measure you use, this is beating the Irish here. So my question is, why do they need an office if they're doing so well?
Well, because I think we still see a lot of disparities around income, education access, health access, areas where, from a sort of public policy perspective, we do see disparities and inequities still in a place like LA. And so I think that part of our effort and our goal and our mission is really to provide those city services to immigrant populations so that they can, be economically successful, or, they can start businesses. We have a pretty robust entrepreneurship program So the idea is really, how do we leverage these different resources, city resources and city infrastructure to help support that integration? But ultimately, it's really about achieving that American dream that you just talked about, is, immigrants coming to the city. 40% of the city is foreign-born, for example. We have a very rich diversity in the city, and I think part of it is, how do we meet those needs of the different populations that are part of this fabric? So we have, yes, a lot of Latin American populations, a lot of Asian populations, given our proximity to the, in terms of our Pacific Rim ties in Latin America. But, we have a burgeoning Bangladeshi community, Filipino community, and the list goes on. And so I think that for a place like LA, we're still seeing all these different ethnic groups in different parts of the city that potentially don't have access to a lot of different either services or to that American dream. And that's the function of this office.
Jaime, I'm so intrigued with what you do. And for you who don't know, Jaime is the Education Evangelist for Google, and you're engaged with so many schools. Part of the question I want to ask you, because you're such an upbeat, positive, energetic guy, and I'm sure you inspire everyone you meet, but part of the question is, are we fooling people into a line of thinking that no longer delivers? Does the college degree, does education actually get you anywhere, get you where you thought you were going to be in pursuing your dream? And so how do you square data that is a challenged assumption versus your evangelism?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I believe first, how do we define American dream? What does that look like, right? 70% of Americans are disengaged with the work that they do. So one thing that's missing from that cover story, very long article, by the way, is...
so long.
is how many of those people, that 9%, are actually happy people? That's an interesting question for me, because that to me is the American dream to be happy. Now, if the American dream is to succeed, and however you define that, I'm living proof that the American dream does exist. My mother came here from Argentina, looking for a better life, escaping poverty, government oppression in Argentina. I was born in Hell's Kitchen, New York. Not the Hell's Kitchen today with the $21 tacos, but the one from the 70s and 80s.
Real hell.
Was, from Escape from New York, Hell's Kitchen, not Hell's Kitchen. Not a great place, and I had what I consider at the time, didn't realize, reality distortion glasses, and said I'm going to graduate from high school and go to college and go to graduate school, and I get to do what I do today. But even with that, I am successful, but I don't think of myself as successful. And by the way, when I do presentations all over the country, all over the world, really, I have thousands of people throughout the year who come up to me and say, I grew up just like you grew up, and look what I'm doing. I grew up like you grew up, and I'm doing this, right? The data might not be there, but there's enough people there. And it's the consequence of even the small number that creates almost a wave, right? So I have 3 kids now, and my daughter is living in New York with a college degree. My son's 17. He's talking about higher education. That economic impact, not just for me, but for my kids and then their kids. And that impact we don't really get a chance to talk about. So I think that's huge, but at the same time, one of the things that I talk to students about, and actually just talked to my Uber driver on the way here today about, was this idea that we think of the American dream, or we think of success as how much money you make, or what role you have, or what you do in your life. When in reality, when I talk to students, I don't ask them what they want to be when they grow up, because one, that world is changing on a daily basis. I ask them, what's the problem that they want to solve? What problem are they interested in solving? And then how do they want to solve that problem? And to me, my problem is, if you're Black or Latino in this country, you have a 9% chance of graduating from college. I want to solve that problem. And it drives everything that I do, whether I'm at Google or anywhere. I could leave Google tomorrow, and the problem stays the same for me. I want to focus on that. So I think when we define the American dream, I think we have to be careful about how we define that, because it means different things to different people.
So what would you do? I mean, one of the things we've been dealing with today is to sort of talk about the part of the site. We're sort of talking about immigration here, but there's another part of it, the folks that don't see themselves as immigrants. They see themselves as incumbents, and they're frustrated, unable to achieve the American dream they thought would be somewhat automatic. And we see and feel the anger in American society. What do you tell them?
Mm-hmm. Well, so here's what I...
You're not working hard enough, or go to school?
Yeah, no, here's what we need to focus on is, We need to, one, identify the American education system as something that served us really well for a very long time. And now we need to look at it again and say, what does it need to look like for the future that we face?
Right.
And what are the skills that kids need for the future that we face? Not just for jobs, but for being good global citizens, for being educated, lifelong learners. What does that need to look like? And I'm fortunate where I get to visit lots of schools here in LA and other places where they are doing that, where they're changing the models and they're providing an opportunity for students. I think we're in that process of changing that model. Right. Every job since the Great Recession is a post-secondary education type of job. And so we need to transform that. Like computer science is just one element of it. There's a whole bunch of different elements that we need to focus on. And if we can change the education model to reflect the future, then we'll start seeing more success.
So Pedro and Linda, I'd love your thoughts on this, because you're talking about transitioning the economy and fewer people achieving huge outcomes and the rest of the crumbs left across the board. And we have an era of automation coming. We have an era where a lot of people are going to displace, particularly people not with the nimbleness of background and skills and whatnot. Do you, and Linda, when you're thinking about this and preparing people, are you guys have a crystal ball to sort of see ahead and say, God, we need to, I don't know what the answer is, but prepare people for the fact that truck driving or Uber driving or the gig economy these may all be very replaceable by AI fairly soon?
I think that's a really great question, and I think it really goes at the core of the future of work. And how do cities, and particularly municipalities and local governments, and under Mayor Garcetti, we have definitely created initiatives to think through, what are the jobs of the future, given sort of the assets that we have economically, locally. LA is the 16th largest economy, I think now, so we're looking at all of these elements because it's obviously tied to education and how do we prepare the future workforce, particularly in a place like LA that has industry sectors from the creative economy to transportation to infrastructure to industries with universities, biomed, technology, Silicon Beach. So there's a lot of different assets that we have in terms of industry sectors. But I also think that one of the things we're looking at too is, with automation, how is that going to influence the workforce, and how do we prepare young people also to be able to have the skill sets and the education that they will need to be successful in these different jobs and the marketplace.
Pedro?
So we have a real problem in LA, but it's a problem that's found throughout America. Our public schools largely serve the poorest children. Right? We have affluent children in private schools, and so what that ends up with is people with power and influence don't feel invested in public education.
Right.
And so consequently, these connections that need to be made between the economy aren't being made, and we haven't had leadership. And I have to say, there are a lot of things I like about the mayor, but he's been very timid when it comes to public education, probably for good reasons, because it's controversial and difficult, but so is homelessness. And to think that you can have a great city without great schools is what many civic leaders have come to think, and I think it's a mistake. That's why we end up with such vast numbers of people who are underskilled and unable to take advantage of jobs that exist. I like the way Jaime focused the question. We should be really problem-oriented in getting our schools and our kids to think about how to use their education to take advantage of opportunities that exist. But we're going to need much more strategic connections between education and the economy than we have now. We have lots of students, not only from K-12, but even from universities, who are coming out unskilled. And that's a real problem.
Jaime?
Yeah, we gotta, nothing's ever new. It's just history repeating itself, right? And so I've been working for 25 years, and that makes me feel old, but there were automation tools when I went into work 25 years ago. A calculator is an automation tool, right? The car I was driving in replaced people who drove, horse carriages, right? So automation's been happening for a long time, and we can actually see it happen in real time in supermarkets, right? You go into a supermarket and you find people in the cashier line who are checking you out, and they're doing process work, right? That job is so easy that you can do it, right? Now you have self-service checkout lines where they don't even give you any training or professional development. They expect you to know how to do it. And then you see companies like Amazon building stores in Seattle that you don't even need to do self-checkout. You can just take things off the shelf and put them in your bag and walk out of the store. Does that mean that supermarket jobs are going away? It means that cashier jobs are going away, but it doesn't necessarily mean that supermarket jobs are going away, because instead of having cashiers, now potentially you can have higher skilled workers in those stores, not there to do process work, but potentially they're not cashiers anymore. They're dietitians, they're nutritionists, they're cooks. They're there to help you, give you an experience when you shop. Like, oh, you want to cook these 2 things? Let me show you how to do that at my demo station. It changes the jobs that we have, and there will be less jobs. I mean, that's been true for a long time now. But the skill level you need for these jobs is growing. I think that's what automation is doing, is it's getting rid of the process parts.
I want to just ask just very quickly the 3 of you to deal with that last part is and then I want to go to the audience, but if you, as you said, have fewer jobs in some measure, and you have a higher requirement for what those jobs are, that leaves a lot of folks on the table, right? And so when we're dealing with this question of the glue that holds us together, there are a lot of people that feel totally screwed by what you just said, right? And are angry and said, you know, I don't want that world.
Right.
And so I just want to acknowledge that that's out there and it's authentic. And I want to just give me 30 seconds each on how you'd fix it.
So I would say, again, this echoes the last panel, we have to look abroad. In many European countries, for example, in Germany, young people are entering technical fields while they're still in secondary education. And they're entering good-paying jobs.
Right.
We have a few models for that. I used to be on the board of an organization called Year Up, which was bringing young people, many of whom only had a GED, into fields in finance, in high tech, where they could get entry-level positions that were career opportunities. We need to look at more possibilities for that kind of connection between education and the labor market.
Terrific. Linda, 30 seconds, or 45 maybe.
So I do come from a higher ed background, so I think one of the things that we could potentially do is work very closely with technical schools and vocational educational schools that provide those skill sets that are necessary to be able to, you know, enter the green jobs marketplace or other kinds of jobs that don't require necessarily a 4-year bachelor's degree, but that give them the skills and training to be able to get into those jobs of the future.
Jaime?
Yeah, I agree with what these guys are saying. I think it boils down to education and the skills that we're helping kids build. But here's the other thing about it is that we need to look at this next generation and consider the fact that, and there needs to be more scientific data on Generation Z, but 70% of them, from some of the studies that I've seen, don't want to work for you at all. They want to do their own thing. And so do we live in a world now that they can do their own things, and what are the skills that they need to be able to do their own thing? So I think that it comes down to education and what we do in that space.
Terrific. Thank you. Let's go right here. Yes.
Hello again, I'm Dia. Sorry, talking too much. So my question is more so for Ms. Linda and Mr. Clemons. Earlier you mentioned about how the Irish is comparable to Latino Hispanic communities and their assimilation. How are you measuring that, considering Irish has had like whiteness and acquired whiteness since like the 19th to 20th century? And then in comparison to other minority groups such as like the Black community or Asian community, I mean, where is the assimilation comparison coming from more so?
Linda?
That's a really great question. So we did a study actually recently with the Chamber of Commerce and the New American Economy looking at the contributions of immigrants, and we basically segmented different ethnic groups within the immigrant population here in the county. And I think one of the interesting findings with this research is that, you know, there is this idea that immigrants actually pay back into the federal system, state system, tax in the form of taxes, but also looking at sort of where the industry sectors are and where they cluster, which I think was really important. So we do see, for example, more segmentation of immigrants, for example, in industries that are, you know, the hotel industry as service workers, or different kinds of sectors where we do see a prevalence of immigrant populations in those industry sectors. But to respond to your assimilation question, you know, I personally think that having studied a lot of, I'm a political scientist by training, but having studied a lot of racial and ethnic relations here in the city in the past when I was an academic, that part of it is really about looking at how people identify themselves. And there's a lot of intersectionality that takes place within these immigrant communities. And so the assimilation model, while that's something that people obviously have researched extensively, there is a sense also of bicultural identities and different kinds of intersectionality that people, for example, tie themselves to. So it's not just about assimilation, but it's really about how to be culturally fluent also in a place like LA as well.
Thank you. I'll just say, look up the work of Gregory Rodriguez, who's a Los Angelino. He's written a book on the subject of this. I think in the big question you asked, I think one of the great travesties in America is that the black community has not enjoyed by any means the assimilation platforms that, say, the Hispanic community has had. So it's a very interesting piece of work, very empirical. He was an early fellow at the New American, wrote it, and he was on the editorial board of the LA Times. So his stuff is around here, and he runs a great group called Zocalo, which he and Joe Matthews, who's another great political commentator here,
could I
involved
just
with.
offer a
Yeah,
quick
sure.
one? Also read David Rodiger, How the Irish Became White.
Oh, yeah.
Because what Rodiger
They weren't
shows-
white. They weren't white. Yeah.
but they took over cities.
Right.
And they took over civil service. There's a reason why so many police and firemen became Irish. It was because of patronage and nepotism that allowed them to get a foothold in the middle class. And that was true in other unions as well. And so it's a message that in non-union jobs, where the wages are low, people are stuck, even though they're working real hard. The Irish had the advantage of good union jobs in fire departments.
Fantastic. And Jaime, I'm going to give you the last word on the subject of this. We're sort of built in this notion that immigration is good. I think that's what this is. But are there stresses from immigration, just real short form? And do you worry that, given our current political situation, immigration may be something of the past?
So if you look at the history of America, every time we needed workers, immigrants are great. Every time we were down in the economy, immigrants are bad. Like, again, we've been doing this for a very long time. And so I think we're in that phase now where the economy's picking up and all of a sudden, like, ooh, who's gonna do all these jobs? And I think we're probably heading into, we do need immigrants for a workforce. But I will say this, I think that the idea of immigration, the American dream, America is still the place, and I travel around the world, where people are like, I want to be there because I can live my dreams, I can shoot for the moon, and I think that problem-solving idea is where the American dream lies.
I see where this evangelist title comes from that you got. So, a big round of applause for Jaime Casap, Linda Lopez, Pedro Noguera. Thank you all very much.